Hey everybody, I'm really hoping that the third time is the charm on getting this video made for you on how to get started on your applique. So cross your fingers. If you were in class, this is what we did in class. If you weren't in class, we're going to be learning two stitches today plus a decorative element. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to learn the blanket stitch, which is this stitch that goes around the edge of this rectangle. You can see these stitches that come in perpendicular to the edge of the felt. And then I also have this this line of stitches that goes parallel to the edge of the felt, and that's a decorative element. The other one is similar in that we have stitches that go perpendicular to the edge of the felt, but we don't have that other element of this line of stitching that goes around the edge. So this is very, very decorative. This is more functional. If I had done this with thin thread that was in the same color as my felt, these would be virtually invisible. So a lot of times in applique, the pieces of wool or felt will be the sort of the focus of the piece. And so the applique of the actual attachment of the pieces of fabric on top of the fabric that's in your hoop will be the thing that we want to look at. So the stitches will be invisible on purpose, but we're learning the stitches, so we're doing those in contrasting colors. So this is the first one, is the blanket stitch. This is the whip stitch here, and then we're going to be doing this decorative lacing over the top as well. So to show you, if you were not in class or you haven't looked at the handout, what we're sort of going for, we're going to be playing with all these different geometric stitches the next few weeks. And when you're laying out your pieces of felt that are going to be cut in rectangles and squares and circles, you want to lay them out so that they arrange in a way where you get these negative spaces that create other shapes that we can work with. So with this, I've got a couple of extra triangles here that we're going to work with. So everyone's is going to look really, really different this time. And just be thinking about when you're laying it out, creating these extra spaces for yourself to work in. Okay, so we're going to jump right into this blanket stitch. Now, I just want to show you that if you did the flower class with us, the blanket stitch was this one here. You already know how to do it. So we're just going to be doing it instead of doing it around this circle that we drew with our pen, we're going to be doing it around the edge of a piece of felt. So what I have to start with, what we did in class, is a piece of felt that's about the size of one of my fingers, a little bit bigger. And then the second thing that we're going to be working with is a circle. If you have something that's nice and round that you can trace, if you don't have anything that's handy that you can trace, dog hair, feel free to use a square for your second shape. That's fine. Either one will work. So I've got my long skinny rectangle. So for the sake of this video, just to keep it shorter on my end, I'm actually just going to cut this in half and use the short one. But you want to use a nice long one so that you can get this nice decorative stitching going. So I am going to jump over to my small hoop. This is the one I did in video number 1, and this is the one I did in video number 2. So don't mind those. We're going to go with this one. Okay, so for the blanket stitch, which is the stitch around the edge, you really want 4 to 5 times the length of the circumference of your shape amount of thread to make it all the way around. I'm going to use this little short one so that I can show you that it's no big deal if you run out of thread. So don't worry about how much thread you have, because you're going to learn how to switch it out. So here's my shape that I'm going to start with. I'm going to start in the middle of my shape on the long edge. Okay, so I'm going to come up from the bottom and I'm choosing my stitch length. So I'm saying I want my stitches to be about this far from the edge. So first stitch is a little bit different. I'm going to come up from the bottom. There's a knot in my thread, of course. And I'm going to go 1 stitch length over. So I've chosen the space that I want to be in between each stitch, and I'm going to try to keep those even. Okay, especially because I'm going to be doing this decorative lacing later. So came up through the bottom. I'm going to go over 1 stitch length. I'm not going to pull this all the way through. I'm going to leave a little loop here. Now I'm going to come up right at the edge of my felt. Okay, but if you'll notice, I'm not coming up through the felt on this part. I'm just coming up through the fabric, but right at the edge of my felt. Now I'm going to go through the loop that's left. And I'm going to pull this a little bit tight. Now this is like when we learned our lazy daisy at the beginning. So on this first one, I'm going to leave this little loop. I'm going to leave it a little bit loosey-goosey. I'm not going to pull it super tight. So that's my first stitch. Okay, second stitch, I'm now going to come back down to my line of stitches that are running parallel to the edge of my felt. I'm going to come one stitch length over. I'm going to go through both the felt and the fabric. Now again, I'm going to come up right at the, this is in the way, right at the edge of my felt, but not through my felt. I'm coming through the hoop, the loop, and I'm going to pull. Now on the second one and every one hereafter, I'm going to go nice and tight. Okay, so that's going to give me like a nice straight line here and a straight line here. Okay, third stitch, same as the second. I'm going to come over one stitch length through the felt and the fabric. Now I'm going to show you the pro move. Instead of going all the way through the fabric, coming back up through my hoop, I'm just going to get my needle and come right back up. Again, only through the fabric, not through the felt. Loop my tail of my thread underneath. Okay, and that gives me that same effect. And I've pulled this one tight. Okay, now I'm at the corner. So the corner, it's the same thing, except I'm going to show you on one I've already done. So let's see, I've gone 1, 2, 3 stitches. Here's my corner. My corner has 1, 2, 3 stitches that all originate from the same point. Okay, so if I draw that out for you. Okay, here's my piece of felt. And I've done 1 stitch, 2 stitch, 3 stitch. Now I'm going to get to the corner. I'm going to do a stitch. And I'm going to come back to that same point. I'm going to do a second stitch that's going to go to the corner. And then I'm going to do a third stitch from that same point that's going to turn the corner. So 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to carry on my way. Okay, so let's do that. And after I do that, I'm going to run out of thread, I think. So for the corner, stitch 1 of 3 for my corner. I'm going down into the fabric and the felt, coming back up just through the fabric. Tail of my thread is behind my needle. That's 1. 2, I'm going back down in the same exact hole that I just came up. Instead of moving over one, going back down the same hole. Now I'm turning my hoop to the side so that I'm getting a nice diagonal line where my needle's coming up. Tail is behind. And I'm gonna be gentle here so that I'm making sure that I'm over the corner of my felt. Okay, that's 2. Now I'm gonna come over, same hole. This is 3 of 3. Back down the same hole. I've turned the corner, so my needle's gonna come right back up at the edge. This goes behind. Okay, get this a little closer so you can see. 1, 2, 3, that's a corner. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm running out of thread. I don't really have much room left, much thread left to go much further. So I'm going to go 1 stitch forward just so you can see this is a normal stitch in through the felt and the fabric, out under the edge, tails behind. Pulling that nice and tight. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just like I'm tacking down a lazy daisy. I'm just going to go right back down on the other side through my fabric. Okay, and I'm going to tack this down. I'm going to just do a knot like I always do. Find my closest stitch, go through, and that's that. Okay, so now just so you can see what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch thread colors here. I'm going to switch to yellow when I come back up. So what I'm going to do to start off my new thread, traditionally I would keep going with pink, so you never knew that I ran out of thread, but I'm going to go with yellow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle back up right under the pink. Okay. So I'm starting at the top. Now I'm going to continue on as if this just came up here from my previous stitch. So I'm going to go over one stitch length through the felt and the fabric, and I'm going to come back up just like I've been doing, up at the edge of my fabric, not through the felt, tail goes behind. Nice and tight. Okay, so this spacing made it so that that was the first one on my corner. So if you want to do all of your corners like this, where all the threads originate from the same point, that is a traditional way to do it. If the spacing doesn't work out, if you don't love the way that looks, whatever it is, you can just continue on. Like I can have my corner stitch, right? If I was doing it traditionally, I would start here, go down and come to the corner. But if I don't want to, if I don't want that look, I can just come over here. Oops, I caught a fuzz. There we go. Again, I'm going to be careful and gentle when I pull on this so that I catch the corner. Okay, now again, if this was 3 of 3, I'd go to the same hole, but I'm not. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to turn the corner. Okay. Tail goes behind. There I go. So there is example 1 of a corner, 3 stitches out of the same hole. Here's example 2 of a corner. They're not out of the same hole at all. Okay, either way works. Now, because I'm going to be doing this decorative lacing stitch over, as I go across down the other side, I want my stitches to be across from each other. If I wasn't doing this decorative lacing, I would be less concerned about that. But here's my corner stitch that's across from itself. Here's this one that's across from that. Okay, now I want this one to be across here. So I'm just going to make a little mark so that I know where I want my stitches to be, so that they sort of talk to the stitch that's across the street. Okay, and then I'll do my corner there. Okay, I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to shut the camera down so that y'all don't have to watch me do this. But here I go underneath, tail goes underneath. Okay, and I've done this right on top of that line that I drew. Okay, and I'm going to come over here. I'm going to show you what to do with the end here where we left this sort of loosey-goosey stitch. All right, so I've come around the corner. I've marked my stitches over on this side as well so that I know I'm coming across from here. So here's my last one. In through the felt and the fabric, back up just through the fabric. Tail goes behind. Okay, there's that. Now for this very last one, this is already started. I left this loose, this little pink one. So all I'm going to do is come under. So I've ended here. I'm just going to come under this one. Okay. And I'm going to grab, I didn't mean to go under that yellow one as well. I just grabbed this and I'm going to give it a little, oops, I missed it. This is why when you loop under thread, you use the dull end of your needle. You use your eye. I'm going to come back out. I didn't mean to split my threads. Okay, let's try this again. So I'm coming through eye first. Here we go. That's better. So now when I pull on this, and especially if it was pink, if I hadn't switched thread colors, you would have no idea that this was not an original stitch. Okay, so now I'm just going to tuck this underneath my fabric. There we go. And that pulled that taut, and now I've got a nice straight edge across the top. So just like always, I'm going to find that nearest stitch and finish this off. Now I'm going to show you the decorative lacing element here. So for that, I'm going to grab another color of thread. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to be lacing these on the long edge, the stitches that are across from each other. So I'm going to come up on a corner. Maybe you did your corner where it all came out of one spot, or maybe you didn't. Doesn't matter. Either way, I'm going to find that corner stitch, the diagonal stitch. And I'm going to come up right there. Okay, that's knotted on the back. Now, what I'm thinking of this like a street. So for this lacing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross the street and then go over one stitch. Okay, so across the street and over one. Now, we just learned, use the eye of your needle to lace under here. Cross the street and over one. Okay, now cross the street, over one. All right, cross the street, over one. So as I do this, you can see as I get this like chevron pattern, underneath the peak of this first one, I've got an empty stitch. And then in the underneath the open spot here, I've got an empty stitch. So I'm always skipping one on the opposite side as I do this first side. Cross the street, over one. Okay, cross the street, over one. Okay, cross the street, over one. Now, I am now that I've reached the other corner, instead of slipping under, I'm going to use the pointy end of my needle, and I'm just going to go right through to the underside. Okay, now over here, I switched colors on my lacing. I could do that here, or if I want it to all be the same, I'm just going to have it all be the same this time. I'm going to come back up under this corner. Okay, now I'm going to cross the street and over one. I don't have to think about it so much this time because I've got an open thread here just waiting for my needle to go underneath it. So it's much easier on the way back to tell what you're doing. Now, we discovered in class that if you forget to cross the street, or if you go across the street and you forget to go over one, you can actually get some kind of interesting looking patterns. So you don't have to be super traditional and do this X pattern. If you want to go, you know, straight down and then over, or cross the street and then cross the street and over one. I don't know. Send me pictures if you do something interesting. But we're just doing straight X's here. Okay, so that's that. Now I'm just crossing the street every time and finding the empty stitch. Oops, got a little crazy there. There we go. So I'll just finish that to make these X patterns all the way across. Okay, so that's that. Now I'm going to show you how to do the whip stitch. Oh, by the way, this is called the laced buttonhole. I'm not sure if I ever actually said the name of the stitch. So the reason that's called the laced buttonhole is because the blanket stitch and the buttonhole stitch are really similar. So this is the buttonhole stitch. This is the blanket stitch. So you can go watch YouTube videos that show you the very subtle difference between the two. All right, so now the whip stitch, I'm going to pop over here for this one. Okay, the whip stitch is basically just a straight stitch that wraps around the edge of your felt. So if you recall from I think our first ever class, we did a back stitch and then we whipped the back stitch. All we did was wrap our thread around our back stitch. Here we're wrapping the thread around the edge of our felt. So I have misplaced my circle. There it is. So for this, you are going to want to, I've aligned mine here next to my rectangle so that I'm setting myself up for next time to have like another shape come in and create this base. Okay, so go ahead and your next shape, whether it's a circle or a square or whatever it is, you just want to line it up somewhere touching your big rectangle that we just did. And I apologize, I'm switching thread colors. I was going to do it in green, but you can't see that. So here we go. I'm doing it in yellow. And I'm just going to do it right here. Okay, so this is so easy, the whip stitch. What we're going to do is we're going to come up underneath. I'm actually going to start over here. Okay, I'm coming up from the bottom through the felt and the fabric. Okay, and then I'm going to go back down just like we did with our blanket stitch just now, only through the fabric. And I'm just sort of tacking down the edge of that felt. Okay, so that knot is nice and taut. All right, then I'm going to come over 1 stitch length, back through both, and I'm going to go back down through just the fabric. All right, this really is possibly the easiest stitch we've learned. Now, if you want to do the pro move, what you can do is you can come back down through the fabric and in one move have your needle come back up through the felt. Oops, I caught some felt fuzz coming back here. Nah, I'm just going to trim this felt fuzz away. Okay. All right. So again, with the pro move, I can go down through my fabric and back up through the felt. It's a little harder to eyeball on a circle to get it nice and even with the pro move, but you can do it. Okay, so that's that. I can also, so I like to have my stitches look more perpendicular to the edge of the fabric, even though it's not technically perpendicular because it's a circle. But if you like the look, you can also go in an angle and pro move, come back at a perpendicular angle. So if I go like this, okay, I've got an angular stitch. And I can do that again, come this way and then come back down. I just prefer the aesthetic of the stitch at this angle, but you can play around with this one too to do that. So that is the whip stitch. And it's just that easy. It's just that easy. So I sent you an email about homework, but I'm going to go over it in this video as well. We're going to be learning 2 different stitches next week that are worked on a square. So what you can do, depending on, I know you're getting this instruction really, really late. So if you don't have time to do any prep for next week, that's fine. If you do have prep, you can do a couple little things. You can put a big square on if you want to, let's say like this. And then you can put, so like I said, we're going to be doing 2 different stitches. So what you can do is you can cut 4 small squares. So you could do a blanket stitch around a big felt square, and then you could do little invisible whip stitches on 4 squares. And then when we do our decorative stitches next week, you'll be all prepped. This is all going to be attached, and you can learn 1 decorative stitch here and 1 here, and then have these to practice on. If that's too much, go ahead and take 2 little squares and just whip stitch those somewhere onto your fabric, and you'll learn 1 decorative stitch here and 1 decorative stitch here. If that is still too much time, you don't have time for that kind of prep, no worries. Cut a square out of some paper, and right before class starts, trace 2 squares on your fabric. Okay, and you can learn 1 stitch in here and another stitch in here. This stitches does not have to be done at an applique form. It can be done right on your fabric. So most important thing, get these taken care of, and then just be prepped with 2 squares drawn or sewn on your fabric for those stitches next week. And okay, whew, I'm holding my breath as I turn this off. I'm hoping this recording works. Bye, everybody. Thank you.